Welcome back to Past the Pumpkin's Glow. Before we dive into today's eerie adventure, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss out on any of our haunting stories. If you have any scary, true-to-you stories of your own, be sure to send them to us in a comment or message over on Instagram or Twitter. Let's dive right into our stories tonight. When I was 14, the summer evening stretched long and golden, suffused with the hum of cicadas and the occasional bark of a distant dog. My sister, Emily, and I spent those evenings riding our bikes through the neighborhood, racing each other past the neatly trimmed lawns and white picket fences. It was on one such evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, that we encountered the van. We had been riding along the main road, our laughter ringing out in the warm air. The van appeared suddenly, turning the corner behind us with a screech of tires. It was an old, rusty vehicle, its windows dark and foreboding. Emily, always the braver one, shouted for us to take a detour. We swerved into a side street, pedaling furiously, but the van followed, its engine growling like a predator on the hunt. "Keep going," Emily yelled, her face pale with fear. I glanced back and saw the van gaining on us. Panic surged through me, and my legs burned with the effort of pushing the pedals faster. Emily veered sharply between two houses, her smaller frame disappearing into the shadows. I tried to follow, but my bike skidded on the gravel. I lost control and was thrown to the ground, my head striking the pavement with a sickening thud. Darkness swallowed me. When I regained consciousness, I was lying in a small patch of grass, my head throbbing and my vision blurry. The world around me seemed distant, muffled, as if I were underwater. I struggled to sit up, my thoughts muddled. Where was Emily? And where was the van? I heard voices then, faint and indistinct. As my vision cleared, I saw flashing red and blue lights reflected off the windows of nearby houses. Two police officers were standing near their patrol car, talking to a woman who lived in one of the houses. She looked concerned, her hands gesturing animatedly as she spoke. "Ma'am, can you describe the van?" one of the officers asked. "It was old Rusty," she replied, her voice trembling. "I think it was brown. I couldn't see the driver clearly. It all happened so fast." I tried to call out, but my voice was a raspy whisper. One of the officers noticed me and rushed over, kneeling by my side. "Hey, it's okay, you're safe now," he said, his voice gentle. "Can you tell me what happened?" I told him everything, my words stumbling over each other in my haste to explain. He listened patiently, nodding, his expression growing more serious. "Where's my sister?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "Emily, she went between the houses." The officer turned and signaled to his partner, who began searching the area with a flashlight. It felt like an eternity before they found her, huddled behind a trash bin, her eyes wide and tear-streaked. She ran to me and we clung to each other, trembling with relief. The police searched the neighborhood thoroughly but found no trace of the van. They took our statements and reassured us they would continue to investigate. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of that night began to fade, but the fear lingered. I found myself looking over my shoulder, my heart racing whenever I heard the rumble of an engine behind me. Months later, the police informed us they had found an abandoned van, matching the description, but there was no evidence to tie it to the incident. The driver was never found. The case went cold, and life slowly returned to normal, but I was never the same. Emily and I grew closer, bound by the shared terror of that night. Even now, years later, the memory haunts me. The sound of a van's engine can send me back to that evening, my heart pounding in my chest. And every time I ride my bike, I can't help but glance back, half expecting to see those dark, ominous windows bearing down on me once more. My mother has always been unkind. I believe she has narcissistic personality disorder, but she's undiagnosed. I myself am diagnosed with bipolar 2 and BPD. When I was younger, she used her husband to torture me and my brother. But image was important to her, and attention. She and her husband were addicts. March 27, 1994, I believe, is the exact date. We went to eat dinner at my stepfather's boss's house. As we pulled up to the fence, I noted a rather large animal behind the gate. I was already afraid of him. The house was grand, almost too grand, with high ceilings and polished floors that reflected the light in a way that made everything look surreal. My mother and stepfather were in their element, laughing too loudly and pretending everything was perfect. They were good at that, putting on a show for the world while hiding the ugliness underneath. Dinner was a tense affair. The adults exchanged looks and whispered conversations that I couldn't quite catch. My stepfather's boss, Mr. Thomason, was a tall man with a stern face that rarely broke into a smile. He kept glancing at me with a peculiar expression, like he was sizing me up. His brother, who lived next door, had the same cold eyes. It made me uneasy, and I tried to shrink into my seat, hoping to be invisible. After dinner, my mother pulled me aside. "Krista, go outside and play with the wolf," she whispered harshly, her breath reeking of alcohol. The wolf was enormous, with eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. I looked at my mother, pleading silently, but her face was stone cold. "Don't be difficult," she snapped, her fingers digging into my arm. "Just go." Reluctantly, I stepped outside. The air was cool, and the night was still. The wolf stood by the fence, watching me. I tried to avoid eye contact, remembering something I'd read about animals perceiving it as a challenge. I walked slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The wolf's eyes followed my every move. I could feel the tension in the air, a crackling energy that set my nerves on edge. I reached out a shaking hand, trying to appear calm, but my fear must have been palpable. In an instant, the wolf lunged. I screamed, my voice piercing the silence of the night. Its teeth sank into my cheek, tearing flesh. Pain exploded in my face, and I fell to the ground, thrashing and screaming. My parents were nowhere in sight. I tried to fight back, pushing against the wolf with all my strength, but it was too strong. It shook its head, tearing more of my flesh. The pain was unbearable, but I didn't stop fighting. I managed to get my thumbs in its mouth, pushing against its cheeks to keep it from going for my throat. The minutes dragged on like hours. I screamed for help, my voice growing hoarse, but no one came. I could hear the adults inside, laughing and talking, oblivious to my screams. The wolf's hot breath was on my face, its teeth snapping dangerously close to my neck. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, my parents rushed outside. My stepfather grabbed the wolf, pulling it off me. My mother looked at me with a mix of horror and disgust. "I can't look at you," she whispered, turning away. They rushed me to the hospital, my mother keeping her distance the whole way. When we arrived, the nurses took over, their faces kind and concerned. They worked quickly, cleaning the wounds and stitching me up. The surgeon said he stopped counting at 50 stitches. There were many more than that. My mother didn't spend the night with me in the hospital. She couldn't bear to look at me. But the nurses were kind, taking shifts to make sure I wasn't alone. They talked in the hallway, their voices hushed but angry. I heard them ripping my mother apart verbally, questioning how she could leave her child alone after such a brutal attack. Someone that wants to go feed their addiction. That's who. I have spent my life being abused by this woman, so I know exactly what happened. Especially hearing all the nurses all night. Not in my room, but I could hear them in the hallway talking about her. I believe it's why they banded together and made sure that I wasn't alone. My parents tried to sue the boss and succeeded. They thought they were going to get the money. They didn't, I did. The judge ordered it into a CD until I could control it at 18. My stepdad was pissed. I finally became a nurse, not sure if it was due to the nurses that showed me kindness when I needed it the most, or if it's because I'm naturally kind to people. My mother and my stepdad divorced. She's 70 now. I thought she'd want to be forgiven. I ended a 9-year relationship in October and felt entirely alone. My mother conned me into moving with her to Arizona. Under every lie she could tell. My daughter is of mixed race. I asked what the composition of the population was before I left Florida. My mother told me it was about 50-50. In the months that I've been here, I've seen 4 black people, which is fine. My daughter does not feel like a minority. But the truth came out shortly after we got here. She's having a surgery coming up and she wanted free aftercare. Once a narcissist, all I can say is I hate her and never want to see her again. But some nights when it's quiet and I look at the scars on my cheek, I'm reminded of that wolf, of how close I came to death, and how, despite everything, I survived. The town always seemed quieter on Halloween nights. At 14, I didn't think much of it, especially with a pillowcase full of candy. My friends and I had scoured the neighborhood, and as the hour grew late, we split up to head home. Walking alone, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the crisp October air. Turning a corner, I noticed a figure a few yards behind me, dressed in a Michael Myers mask. At first, I dismissed it as another trick-or-treater heading home late, just like me. But when I quickened my pace, he did too. My heart pounded in my chest, louder than my hurried footsteps on the pavement. Panic set in. I began to run, my candy bag swinging wildly, spilling its contents. The masked man matched my speed effortlessly, the distance between us closing rapidly. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. He was after me. As I rounded the final corner to my street, he lunged, tackling me to the ground. Pain exploded in my leg as the first stab sliced through my skin. The knife gleamed in the pale streetlight as it descended again and again. My leg, my lower back, my chest. I screamed, but the sound seemed swallowed by the night. Everything blurred, a cacophony of pain and terror. Just when I thought it was over, a voice broke through the haze. Another pedestrian, someone walking their dog, had seen us. The man in the mask hesitated, then bolted into the shadows, leaving me bleeding on the sidewalk. I don't remember much of what happened next. I recalled the sirens, the flashing lights, and the paramedics' frantic movements. My parents' faces, pale with horror, hovering over me in the hospital. The next 2 years were a blur of recovery and confinement. I wasn't allowed out of the house. The wounds healed, but the fear remained, lurking beneath the surface of every shadow. I never found out if the attack made the news or if the man was ever caught. The mask, the knife, and the horror became a part of my nightmares, etched into my memory. Even now at 20, Halloween nights bring back the ghost of that terror. The scars on my body are a constant reminder of the night when innocence was shattered by a faceless horror, and safety became a fragile illusion. My family has always struggled with poverty. No matter how hard we worked, it seemed like we could never get ahead. Meanwhile, my grandmother, Mary Jo, lived a life of luxury. She went on lavish vacations, lived in a big house, and always had money to spare. It never made sense to me. I used to think she was just better with money, but as I got older, I began to hear rumors from other family members. They whispered about a dark secret, something about a pact my grandmother made with an occult. I'm 40 years old now, and I've heard from my mother and aunts that when my grandmother and her sister were younger, they sold the souls of their future family members to ensure their own wealth and success. The story seemed too bizarre to be true, but when I looked at the pattern of our lives, it became harder to dismiss. My mother died in 2010. My grandfather passed in December 2020. My aunt and her son both died in January 2021, right after my grandfather. Each time a family member died, my grandmother mysteriously came into a large sum of money. While some might say it was life insurance, the amounts didn't add up. The insurance policies were worth maybe $15,000 to $20,000 each, but I saw the checks. My grandmother was pulling in close to $500,000. There was also something else, something darker that followed me around. I first noticed it after my mother died. It was a shadow person, like a silhouette of a child. It would appear in the corners of my vision, always just out of clear sight. Every time I saw it, something bad would happen. I'd lose my job, get into an accident, or face some other misfortune. And as these events unfolded, the shadow would grow. Over the period of a year, it transformed from a child into a full-grown adult, mirroring the decline of my life. Then it would go retreat into hiding for an unknown period of time. Each time I see the childlike figure, I know something is coming. As it grows, something terrible can happen at any time. One night after losing my job yet again, I saw the shadow clearly for the first time. It stood at the foot of my bed, tall and menacing. Its presence filled the room with a suffocating dread. I knew then that my grandmother's pact was real. This entity was a manifestation of the curse placed upon our family. The shadow cycle, as of recent, has been the worst for my wife and myself. I'm stressed to no end, because our life is finally getting better. Our daughter is 5, and at 2.5, she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. I try to live life and roll with the punches, but I've not seen the entity in a while. I have the most to lose now when compared to any of the cycles in the past. Desperate for answers, I confronted my grandmother. I didn't mince words. I told her about the shadow and how it grew with every tragedy in my life. Her reaction shocked me. She didn't deny it. Instead, she looked at me with a mixture of pity and resignation. "It's true," she said. "Your great aunt and I made a pact when we were young. We wanted to escape poverty, and we were promised wealth in exchange for the souls of our descendants. I thought it was just a silly ritual, but then the money started coming in. I'm so sorry." Her apology was hollow, and it did nothing to ease my anger. "Why didn't you stop it? Why let us suffer?" "I tried," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "But the entity demands its due. I've tried to protect you all, but I'm powerless against it." I left her house that night with more questions than answers. The shadow still follows me, growing larger with each passing misfortune. I don't know if there's a way to break the curse, but I'm determined to find out. I won't let my children suffer the same fate. To anyone listening, believe this or not, but this is my story. My grandmother's greed condemned us all, and now I live with the consequences of her actions. If you ever see a shadow in the corner of your eye, take heed. It might be more than just a trick of the light. As the clock struck midnight, the house fell into a haunting silence, the kind that presses down on your ears and makes you hear things that aren't there. I sat alone in the living room of my grandparents' old, creaking house, a place steeped in memories and shadows. It was the kind of night where the darkness seemed deeper, the quiet more oppressive. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, an uneasy prickling at the back of my neck. It happened the moment I stood up to go to bed. A silhouette appeared in the doorway to the kitchen. It was unmistakably human-shaped, yet devoid of any discernible features. A faint white glow surrounded it like an aura. Inside the silhouette, the air shimmered as if warped by heat, reminiscent of looking down a long, sun-baked road in the height of summer. At that exact moment, a grating noise erupted from the kitchen, like a butcher knife being dragged back and forth across the countertops. The sound cut through the silence like a scream in the dark. My heart pounded against my ribcage as the silhouette edged closer, the eerie heat haze within it distorting its form. "Leave me alone," I whispered, my voice trembling. To my shock, the silhouette halted, then receded into the shadows. The scraping noise ceased, leaving only my ragged breathing in the stillness. Minutes later, the silhouette reappeared. It was relentless, an unwavering presence that seemed to feed on my fear. Each time it neared, I repeated my desperate plea, and each time it obeyed, retreating only to return again. The repetitive cycle gnawed at my sanity. The air was thick with dread, a tangible force pressing down on me. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the apparition. The thought struck me like a cold slap. My grandfather. He had passed away not long ago, and this was his house, filled with his memories, his essence. Could it be him? A restless spirit, unable to move on? I called out to my grandmother, her room just down the hall, hoping for some reassurance, some explanation. "Grandma?" I shouted, my voice shaking. "Something's here. It's Grandpa, I think." There was a pause, then her voice, calm and dismissive, floated down the corridor. "Oh, be quiet. Nothing is going to hurt you." Her words did little to soothe my fear. How could she be so nonchalant? The silhouette persisted, its glow pulsating faintly as it approached once more. I clutched my head, willing myself to wake from this nightmare. But it was all too real. The house felt like a living entity, its very walls closing in on me. That night left an indelible mark on my soul. The memory of the silhouette, the heat haze within it, and the incessant scraping noise haunted my dreams. Even now, years later, I can't walk past a darkened doorway without a shiver running down my spine. The echo of that night whispering through my mind. Some part of me still believes it was my grandfather, trapped between worlds, trying to reach out. But another part, the part that lies awake in the dead of night, wonders if it was something else entirely. Something darker, something that latched onto my fear and reveled in my terror. I will remember that night for the rest of my life. It scared me that bad. When I was in my mid-teens, still living with my parents, an unsettling event changed my life forever. One night, I woke up abruptly for no apparent reason. An inexplicable sense of danger gripped me. I tried to move, but to my horror, I couldn't. I realized I was experiencing sleep paralysis, a condition I had only heard about in passing. Lying on my stomach, I could only move my eyes. My room was laid out in a way that gave me a clear view of my surroundings. My bed was positioned in the far corner, with a wall and a window to my left, and another wall at the head of the bed. Directly in front of me, there was a small TV stand holding an old, bulky television. The stand was set just a foot away from my bed, a detail that would soon become crucial. As I scanned the room with my eyes, trying to reassure myself that I was safe, I noticed something strange near the edge of the TV stand. A pair of spindly legs stood there, legs that didn't belong to any human. I fought against the paralysis, managing to turn my head slightly for a better look. My heart pounded as I followed the legs upward with my eyes. Standing beside me was a small figure, no taller than 5'5". Its skin was reptilian, covered in scales, and its eyes were large and black, occupying most of its face. There was no discernible mouth or nose, just those eerie eyes staring right at me. It resembled a gray alien, but with a reptilian twist. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Tears streamed down my face as the being's body remained facing the TV wall, while its head was turned unnaturally toward me. It stood there for what felt like hours, watching me silently. Then, slowly, its head turned to face the wall. Without any walking motion, the creature began to hover. It glided toward the wall and passed through it as if it wasn't there. As soon as it disappeared, I regained control of my body. I wanted to run to my mom, but before I could move, a high-pitched whirring noise filled the room from behind my head, and I blacked out. The next night I woke up again, paralyzed, but this time I couldn't open my eyes. The same whirring noise returned, longer in duration, accompanied by a sharp pain behind my head. Darkness consumed me once more. On the third night, everything escalated. I woke up to an excruciating pain in my head, a pain I could only describe as diabolical. It felt like someone was bashing my head with a steel bat. I screamed and flailed in agony, my mom trying desperately to help, but her touch and even the sound of her voice only intensified the pain. For half an hour, I writhed in torment until the pain abruptly ceased, and I passed out. After that night, strange occurrences became a part of my life. Even now, I experience odd events that defy explanation. Whatever that being was, it left an indelible mark on my existence, forever altering my perception of reality. I've always considered myself a rational person, not one to buy into ghost stories or supernatural tales. My life was filled with work, family, and the occasional hobby to pass the time. That all changed 5 years ago when my father-in-law, Martin, passed away. Martin was a kind man, a bit of a collector with an eye for unique and intricate items. One of his prized possessions was a music box shaped like a wizard, detailed and whimsical, a true artisan's piece. Martin's passing hit my husband hard, and we inherited many of his belongings. Among these was the wizard music box, which my husband insisted we keep. "It's a part of him," he would say. We stored it away, still in its box in the den. Life went on, and the music box became an afterthought, gathering dust on a shelf. Then one quiet evening while working in my den, the air around me seemed to change. I was focused on an upcoming project deadline, the house silent except for the gentle hum of the computer. Out of nowhere, the wizard music box began to play. The soft melodic chimes broke the silence, sending chills down my spine. I glanced over at the box, still sealed and untouched. My first thought was a logical one. Maybe it was some sort of malfunction. I approached it cautiously, lifting the lid to reveal the intricate wizard, its hand outstretched as if casting a spell. The music continued to play, a hauntingly beautiful tune that was both unfamiliar and eerily comforting. I turned the key to stop the music, and it did, but the unease lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this. The next day, I mentioned the incident to my husband. He laughed it off, attributing it to the quirks of old mechanical devices. Yet, there was a flicker of something in his eyes, a shadow of unease that mirrored my own. As days turned into weeks, the music box remained silent. I began to doubt my own experience, convincing myself it was a one-time fluke. That was until one night, as I was reading in bed, the music started again. This time, it was louder, more insistent. My husband was already asleep, undisturbed by the noise. I got up, my heart pounding, and made my way to the den. The wizard was playing its tune again, but this time the music seemed different. It was slower, more deliberate. I could almost feel a presence in the room, something watching me, waiting. I turned off the music box again, but I couldn't sleep that night. The next morning, I decided to do some research. I dug through old family albums and documents, hoping to find some connection to the music box. It was then I discovered an old photograph of Martin as a young man, standing next to a woman I didn't recognize. In his hand, he held the wizard music box. On the back of the photograph was a note. "To my beloved Martin, may this music always remind you of our love. Forever, E." I showed the photo to my husband, and his face went pale. He explained that E was Emily, Martin's first love, who had tragically passed away before they could marry. The music box was a gift from her, a symbol of their unfulfilled love. Understanding dawned on me. The music box wasn't just a whimsical object. It was a connection to Martin's past, a past filled with love and loss. The encounters with the music box began to make sense. It was Martin's way of reminding us of the importance of love and the memories that linger long after we're gone. We decided to honor Martin's memory by displaying the music box in our living room. Since then, the music has played only occasionally, but each time it does, it fills the house with a sense of peace and connection. It's as if Martin and Emily are reminding us to cherish our moments together, to hold on to love and the memories that shape our lives. Yesterday, I learned something new from my husband's aunt. Apparently, Martin had a deep love for music boxes, particularly for their intricate details and the craftsmanship involved. It made me smile, thinking about how much the Wizard music box must have meant to him. Now, every time it plays, I feel a bit of Martin's presence, a comforting reminder that love, in its many forms, truly never dies. Curious for more creepy tales? Don't just listen to the shadows, join our community of the brave and the bold. Hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and ring the bell to never miss out on our allegedly true scary stories. Have your own ghostly encounters, sinister sightings, or otherwise scary event? Drop us a comment below. We're dying to hear from you.